Passengers have been checking in for the first ever direct commercial flight between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The historic flight will travel from Tel Aviv to Abu Dhabi through Saudi airspace. It comes after Israel and the UAE agreed to normalize relations in a deal brokered by the U.S. The UAE is the third Arab country to establish full diplomatic ties with Israel. For many residents, the deal means that they can finally bring covert business and personal relationships into the open.
These are unusual days for Mark Halawa, a Jewish Israeli-Palestinian businessman. From his small office in Jerusalem and through travel, he has been doing business with the United Arab Emirates for several years, but always under the radar. The countries had no diplomatic relations until recently. As a first step, phone lines were officially established.
Right now, my friends are just calling me for the fun of it. Hey man, how are you? I'm like, oh my gosh, I just heard in the news that we could call each other directly. Communication is something we humans are known for. Civilization requires communication and work together. I really praise that wonderful, great vision of this country, United Arab Emirates.
Halawa, who facilitates the certification of halal and kosher products between the UAE and Israel, is on a Zoom call to the Emirates. For years, people had to use foreign providers or the internet to connect.
Alhamdulillah, everybody is very happy here, and everybody is very excited to visit Quds and to see our friends in Israel also.
It'll be actually great, just imagine.
The deal breaks with the long-held view among Arab countries that normalizing ties would only come after Israel ends its military occupation of the Palestinian territories. In Israel, there have been a lot of firsts in the past days. First direct interviews with Emirati officials, like here at TV channel 13 in Tel Aviv. Reporters were sent immediately to Abu Dhabi, and Israeli news sites were reportedly unblocked in the Emirates.
You know what is amazing? Normally in those cases, it takes time, but now everything is on the table. Relationship, embassies, flights, tourism, everything is moving very fast. We can phone the Emirates, we can go there, we can have interviews there.
Only Egypt and Jordan have signed peace treaties with Israel in the past. Mark Halawa hopes that this new agreement will go beyond business and security matters.
I suspect that this will be a warmer peace than the relationship with Jordan. There was never bad blood, there was never wars, there was never any misunderstanding or political disagreement direct between us and the United Arab Emirates, or anybody in the Gulf for that reason. So I'm really optimistic.
Few Arab countries have signaled that they might consider following the UAE's move. It could effectively reshape the map of alliances in the region.
And joining me now from Jerusalem is ZW correspondent Tanya Kramer. So as we heard, Tanya, the first commercial flight taking place today. Who is on board and how is this moment being commemorated?
Well, on board you have two delegations. One is the Israeli delegation headed by the head of the national security, and the other delegation is headed by Jared Kushner, US President Trump's advisor, because this agreement that still has to be signed at some point was brokered by the US. So we understand on this first flight it's all about civilian matters. They will be talking about tourism, maybe direct flights, aviation, agriculture, and of course it's then in the details what kind of bilateral agreements they will work on. Now, if you ask me what people are thinking here in Israel, I mean, this day has been very much anticipated, as we heard in the report. You know, it all went very fast. It's very exciting for most people because it opens up Israel towards the east, and it's of course not the first time. It doesn't happen very often that Israel signs a peace agreement. The last time was in 1994 with Jordan. Now the UAE would be the third Arab country owning or the first Gulf nation to normalize ties with Israel. On the other hand, Palestinians are very much concerned about this normalization because it actually changes the stance, at least the public stance of Arab countries, saying that there shouldn't be normalization with Israel unless Israel ends its military occupation over the Palestinians.
Given all of that, Tanya, what does this flight connection mean for both countries?
Well, I think the first thing to say, it's very significant. This is an El Al flight, it's Israel's national carrier. And from what we understand, Saudi Arabia reportedly will open its airspace, so it can be really a direct flight from Tel Aviv to Abu Dhabi. That is the first time. So it has a lot of, some symbolism in this move, and it signals also an openness to this agreement. Now, of course, it has a lot of interests as well, economic interests, but also political interests, and it somehow shows a shift, maybe also, in the alliances, a common enemy, so to speak, Iran, Israel, and the Gulf states. But also, of course, it's describes the legacy of an embattled Israeli Prime Minister here, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Tanya Kramer with a view from Jerusalem today. Thank you.